History is full of moments where one life changes everything. Some figures reshape nations, rewrite the balance of power, and leave legacies that last for centuries. Few have done this more decisively than Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden. By 1632, he was Europe's most feared military commander, a king, a strategist, and the architect of a new style of warfare. His victories in the 30 Years' War had turned Sweden from a Baltic kingdom into a dominant European force, and his military innovations revolutionized how battles were fought. Everything came down to one battle, one moment, one decision that could have changed it all. At Lützen, Sweden faced off against the formidable imperial army of Albrecht von Wallenstein. The battle was brutal, the fog thick, and the stakes higher than ever. But when the dust settled, Gustavus Adolphus stood victorious, not just in battle, but in history. He had survived the chaos of the battlefield, and his leadership would go on to reshape Europe forever. With Gustavus Adolphus still at the helm, Sweden's rise was far from over. The Protestant cause would not just survive, it would dominate. The 30 Years' War would take a very different path, and by the time the final peace was signed, the world would belong to a Sweden that had never been stronger. By the time Gustavus Adolphus crushed Wallenstein at Lützen, Sweden was no longer just a regional Baltic power. It was a force that could reshape the destiny of Europe itself. For decades, Sweden had steadily expanded its influence, defeating Denmark and Poland, securing control over vital trade routes, and perfecting a modernized military machine. But before Lützen, its position remained precarious. The Holy Roman Empire, Spain, and even France still cast long shadows over the continent. Sweden needed a decisive moment, a victory so complete that it would force the world to take notice. Lützen provided that moment. With Wallenstein's imperial forces shattered and in retreat, Gustavus seized the opportunity to push further into Germany. He tightened Swedish control over the Protestant states, securing key alliances and establishing permanent Swedish military rule over vast territories. The Protestant princes who had once feared being crushed under Habsburg rule now rallied behind Gustavus, seeing him as the true protector of their faith and freedoms. Under his continued leadership, Sweden didn't just hold its position, it expanded aggressively. With the Holy Roman Emperor on the defensive, Gustavus pressed his advantage, launching a full-scale invasion into the heart of Catholic Europe. The 30 Years' War, once a struggle for survival, had become a campaign for total Swedish dominance. Gustavus Adolphus was no longer just a king. He was the undisputed master of northern and central Europe. And for the Habsburgs, for the Pope, and for the old order of Catholic monarchs, the nightmare was only just beginning. The victory at Lützen was just the beginning. Gustavus Adolphus, now secure in his position as the dominant military force in Europe, wasted no time. With Wallenstein's army broken and retreating, the Swedish king launched a full-scale offensive into the heart of the Holy Roman Empire. His forces, already battle-hardened, pushed deeper into Catholic-held Germany, seizing vital strongholds. Protestant cities and principalities, once fearing annihilation at the hands of the Habsburgs, now rallied behind Sweden. Gustavus declared that no Protestant state would ever again suffer under Catholic oppression, and with every victory, Swedish influence expanded. The Holy Roman Emperor desperately sought reinforcements, But the damage had already been done. With Gustavus Adolphus at the helm, Sweden had transformed from an opportunistic player in the war into an empire builder, determined to reshape Central Europe forever. The Swedish king's next step was to establish a permanent military and political presence in Germany. Rather than simply acting as a Protestant saviour, he began annexing territories, turning them into Swedish-controlled regions. The Protestant princes had little choice: either swear loyalty to Sweden or risk destruction. By 1635, Sweden had effectively carved out a northern German empire, stretching from the Baltic coast to the interior of the Holy Roman Empire. But with each victory, new enemies emerged. France, which had been supporting Sweden financially, now began to question its own position. Cardinal Richelieu, once eager to see the Habsburgs weaken, now faced a new problem: a Protestant Sweden becoming too powerful. Tensions between Stockholm and Paris grew. Would France turn against its former ally? Meanwhile, Spain, still a dominant force in Europe, recognised that a stronger Sweden threatened its influence over the Catholic world. Spain had already been fighting the Dutch in the 80 Years' War. Would Sweden now join forces with the rebellious Dutch to shatter Spanish power in the Netherlands? The balance of power was shifting, and Sweden was now at the centre of it all. With Germany under firm control, Gustavus Adolphus set his sights beyond Europe. Sweden had long been a naval power in the Baltic, but under his leadership, it would become a true maritime empire. He poured resources into building Sweden's navy, challenging Denmark for dominance of the Baltic Sea. By the late 1630s, Swedish warships patrolled northern waters, ensuring that all trade through the Baltic passed under Swedish authority. But Gustavus had bigger ambitions. Sweden had already established New Sweden in North America in 1638, but this time it wouldn't be a minor colony. With Sweden's newfound power, a fleet was dispatched to reinforce and expand Swedish holdings in the New World. Swedish settlements in North America grew rapidly, rivaling those of the Dutch and the English. Meanwhile, Swedish traders and warships ventured into the Caribbean, eyeing key ports and sugar plantations. Could Sweden challenge the Dutch and the Spanish for control of the lucrative Atlantic trade? Gustavus Adolphus believed so. By 1640, Sweden had become an empire on two continents, ruling over vast lands in Germany, the Baltic, and the New World. But with great power came great opposition. The old empires of Europe could no longer ignore the rise of Sweden. Would war with France and Spain become inevitable? Would the English and Dutch, who had once dismissed Sweden as a regional power, now have to treat them as equals on the global stage? Gustavus Adolphus had taken Sweden from a northern kingdom to a global force. But the fight for supremacy was far from over. By the time Gustavus Adolphus had fully consolidated his hold over Germany, the 30 Years' War was no longer just about Protestant survival. It had become a struggle for Swedish dominance in Europe. With the Holy Roman Empire on his knees and Catholic resistance crumbling, Gustavus dictated the terms of peace. The Peace of Westphalia, which in our timeline weakened the Habsburgs, instead became a monument to Sweden's ascension. The German states under Swedish influence were no longer independent allies. They were territories of a greater Swedish empire. This created an entirely new power struggle. In our history, France emerged as the dominant European force after the war, filling the vacuum left by the weakened Holy Roman Empire. But in this alternate history, Sweden had ensured that there was no vacuum, because it had filled it first. Would France accept a Protestant Sweden ruling over Germany? Or would a Swedish-French war become the inevitable next chapter? For Sweden, holding on to its gains in Germany was only part of the equation. With its massive military machine, the next natural step was to secure its position in the Baltic and challenge Russia's ambitions. Historically, Russia spent much of the 17th century expanding westward, fighting to access the Baltic Sea. But with Gustavus Adolphus alive and his empire commanding the entire northern coast of Europe, Russia's expansion could have been cut off even before it began. Would Peter the Great have ever built his empire if Sweden controlled every major Baltic port? Could Sweden have strangled Russia's access to European trade, permanently keeping it a landlocked giant, unable to challenge Western Europe? Sweden's presence in Germany also raised a fundamental question about the Holy Roman Empire itself. In our history, the war weakened the empire but didn't destroy it. But with Sweden in direct control of major German territories, would the empire have even survived at all? Could Gustavus Adolphus have gone further, not just weakening the Habsburgs, but completely dismantling the Holy Roman Empire itself? If so, the entire structure of European politics would have changed forever. But what about Britain? In our timeline, the late 17th and 18th centuries saw Britain rising to global dominance, forming the largest empire in history. But what if, instead of Britain ruling the seas, it was Sweden? With its foothold in Germany, the Baltic and the New World, Sweden's expansion wouldn't have stopped in Europe. With Gustavus Adolphus leading a militarized, trade-driven empire, Sweden might have secured a far greater position in the Americas, West Africa, or even Asia, long before Britain cemented its rule. Instead of the British Royal Navy ruling the waves, could we have seen the Spanish Navy as the dominant force of the 18th century? One thing is certain: if Gustavus Adolphus had lived, the modern world would look nothing like it does today. The survival of Gustavus Adolphus could have completely rewritten European history. Sweden might have cemented itself as a long-term superpower, controlling vast territories in Germany, the Baltic and beyond. The 30 Years' War could have ended sooner or dragged on even longer, reshaping the fate of the Holy Roman Empire, France and Russia. With more time, Sweden might have expanded into the New World or built a naval empire, forever altering the colonial balance of power. But history didn't unfold that way. Gustavus Adolphus died at Lützen, and Sweden, despite its continued role in European politics, never became the empire it might have been. His military innovations influenced warfare for centuries, but his country's dominance faded within a century of his death. So, what do you think? If Gustavus Adolphus had lived, could Sweden have dominated Europe? Would it have changed the course of modern history? Or would another power have risen to challenge them? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this alternate history deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more historical what-ifs.